Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Advanced Color Correction with Lumetri in Adobe Premiere with me, Kambi Rambegi. Today is March 31st at 9 a.m. and we're going to have a 3-hour session. I'm going to start a project to begin with, selecting for example, the folder I'm being using right now. Here it is, called Advanced Color Correction. I'm just going to use that one for now as my work folder. Remember, my work folder, the location that I choose in Adobe Premiere is usually used by default. Mine is the same as a project. So everything I do, including, I know we don't capture things anymore, but if you do any kind of video preview, especially when you do color correction, some of us don't have necessary hardware for it to run the color correction, especially if you are dealing with a 4K footages or even higher. I've seen the new cameras, they have a 6K, and I have some information about the new upcoming Canon mirrorless camera, and then Canon confirmed it is an 8K. So these sorts of equipments eventually becomes common between video and photographers. And what's the problem is you need a very powerful computer to run it. So we need to run a lot of previews, and therefore that folder, it's a good spot for me to save everything in there. My footages are decent enough today. They're 1080 within that size, or 720p, so I don't really need to ingest any footages to convert them to any other format. But again, if you do have footages that are very high resolution, you may want to ingest them at least for editing purposes. For color correction, we don't usually ingest because I want to see all the pixels that there's available in the actual footage. I'm gonna give this thing a name. Just call this thing Project Color Correction. I'm gonna leave everything else as is. Just gonna click OK very quickly. Now, I'm just gonna jump into preferences right away in the memory. One of the most important thing when you are doing the color correction is how much memory you have in your computer, because in the world of color correction, the speed of the editing or viewing a clip is not important. You just want to have a precision. So a couple of things you need to make sure you have on your end. One of them is have the most amount of memory you can. Premiere usually gets saturated around the 32 gigabyte. So if you have a 32 gig minimum on your computer, you should be all right. But if you use a Premiere with Adobe After Effects or Media Encoder, then I would recommend having a 64 or 128 to start with. Also, Adobe recommended to change the optimized rendering from performance into a memory mode. Unfortunately, if I do that, then I have to restart my Adobe Premiere, so I'm not going to do that. But if you do a color correction, it's highly recommended you do this thing. It's not for people with a less amount of memory. It's not for that. It's just Adobe Premiere will use more memory of your computer and display the video quality better. The rest of the settings on the appearance, I'll put my appearance to the darkest mode, because I don't want the bright appearance kind of give me a wrong input when it comes to looking at the colors. Everything else should be all right. I'm just going to click OK. Also, be very careful with your monitor when you do color correction. Depends on using graphic cards. My screen does have the true color settings. So this is the screen I'm selecting right now, is set to Rec 709, which is a standard for high definition broadcast color. I can also override the settings. These are monitor settings, by the way, not a graphic card settings. My graphic card can also change the color. If I go to the NVIDIA color panel, and there is an option for setting up and adjusting the color if I'm not mistaken, it should be one of these settings there that you can actually, there we go. You can set your colors based on the video player mode, or you can override all the settings. Obviously, you need some sort of color calibration system, such as a spider or something else that can calibrate your monitor. And if you don't have a full-size monitor, you rely on a laptop, your laptop doesn't have a good color LCD or LED, use your graphic cards to try to enhance the settings. Once you get all of these things set up, you're ready for a color correction. Otherwise, you are not seeing the video or project properly. I left my project to GPU accelerated by CUDA from NVIDIA because the color filter I'm going to use today is a Lumetri color, and Lumetri heavily use computer CPU and your graphic card GPU. So select the fastest graphic card you have and it should be all right. As far as the asset goes, I have a bunch of clips here. Let me go to my folder. This is from yesterday's project. So I'm gonna go to my Alico online lessons and I have these clips to color correct. I'm going to import all of them because it's not just the one clip. I'm going to show you multiple ways of color correction. Some of these things, like these two last clips, these are raw files, come from a red camera as a sequential. So I convert them to an MOV file. So I'm just going to import and just to preview some of these footages. So this is one of the footage we're going to use. This is relatively simple because she's not really moving anywhere. She just blinks. I'm going to change the color of her eyes into a green, for example, or blue if you want to, and everything else. She's supposed to have a red hair, as you can see, is there, does have. And then, as you can see, this video is very washed out. We're gonna take a look at this thing and correct it. And this is another footage. I'm just gonna, create a little simple video that the previous clip, she's dreaming or she's thinking about, summertime. And I want to make sure these two color matches. And this is a little bit off because the clip I have before this, which you guys don't see, the water is really blue. So I need to make sure the water is nice and blue here. I have another clips here. It's just a simple thing. A lot of these clips don't have an audio, and it's just looks like an old house. And another clip is called the harbor. There we go. And this needs to be color corrected, of course. And then the worst ones are these ones. As you can see, these are really wide, not very long, 2-3 seconds. And the problem with this thing is, well, it's really washed out, so you guys can see it. This is what the raw footage is coming from the red camera. Also, at the set, they put another light behind this particular window right here, this window, and they hoped that they can get a very nice God rays or some sort of like here you guys can see this part, there is more like a God rays passing through, and they couldn't really get this one right. I don't know what was the problem, so we have to do this thing digitally. We got to add it ourselves. Now I know this sounds like an Adobe After Effects territory, but I'm going to show you can do a lot more than you can imagine with Adobe Premiere. So we're going to try to add this thing to Adobe Premiere and see what happened. And also, this needs a heavily color corrected clip. There's two of them, so I have to think about the other one. One of the things about these clips are they need multiple stages of a color correction. So it's not a one filter you apply. You need to apply in multiple stages. So I'm going to talk about color correction by starting with the simple clips. I'm going to grab these two clips. and start with, for example, this one, these two. I know usually when you do editing, that's not the good thing to do by simply dragging the clips inside your timeline without creating any kind of trimming or in and out point, but we passed the point. So this is not an editing class. This is just, I'm dragging a bunch of clips there to see what they look like and what I can do with it. So these two. Oops, did I drag the same thing twice? I guess I did. Oh, sorry about that. You see, that's the problem when you don't use them inside a source panel. You can see them. So to begin with, I want to match these two clips. Sometimes actually it's better for editing that I put the harbor first, because it looks like we have a shot of a city and then we have a close-up of a building. So that's establishing shot. That's the next one. I want to make sure these two kind of line up when it comes to the color correction. First thing I need to do is I need to change my interface into a color correction mode. So I need to go to my window, find a panel called Lumetri Scopes. The Lumetri Scopes is a panel that I can look at in a screen and then decide what the scopes look like and what the colors look like. This needs to be adjusted, so I'm not really worried about the settings at the moment. I also need to get my Lumetri color panel. Lumetri color panel appears on the right side. This filter is a gigantic, very long filter, so it's a good thing they put it on the right side as a vertical panel. Otherwise, if it was half size and you had to scroll a lot. I also grab my effect controls and I place it right with the Lumetri color, because once you apply a Lumetri filter to the clip, what's going to happen is the effects as a Lumetri appear here. So this is a good place if you want to create a keyframe or animate it. I need to keep in mind that some of the footages we need to animate and track the person. So I'm going to make this panel as small as possible. In reality, what you need to do, you need to go to your video playback and you connect a second monitor or a third monitor to your system, and then you enable transmit Mercury. Enabling a Mercury transmit, what it does is send the signal from the program panel into an external monitor. The external monitor could be a very expensive color calibrated OLED monitor or a old CRT monitor or a plasma display or very high-end OLED screen or LCD panel calibrated so you can make a correct judgment on how the color look like. That's why usually colorists keep this panel very, very small. So this is my setup. Now, before I do something else, I usually don't apply a color to the clip itself. Why are you asking? Because I do a lot of adjustments to it, and I might need to change, remove, or turn the color on and off or do something else with it. So I usually create something known as an adjustment layer. In Adobe Premiere, adjustment layer is not exactly like a Photoshop adjustment layer, for example. I'm gonna leave all the settings as is, okay it, and I don't renaming it at all. I never rename it. I just place it on top. Now, as I said, in Photoshop, when you create an adjustment layer, the issue with Photoshop is adjustment layer must be one of the presets. Like it should be something like levels or curves or whatever you use in Photoshop. But in Adobe After Effects, adjustment layer is literally a blank layer. Look, there's nothing on it. If I collapse my motion, there's nothing. However, you don't need to rely on one specific thing. I can go and type, for example, blur and apply a fast blur. And I make the video behind a blurry. Now, as you can see, this adjustment layer actually works as a filter. Now in Photoshop, that's not possible because the name adjustment layer comes with the presets that you have to choose one of them. So we use the adjustment layer quite a bit in Adobe Premiere. Be very careful with one thing. In the color correction, there's an option said selection follows playhead. You must select that one. Why not, you're asking? Because if, look at my effect controls, what's going on here? You don't know what I'm selecting. If I select the clip behind it, then I might do a color correction on that accidentally, not an adjustment layer. So I go, look, I move my mouse on the side, and if I select the clip and I move it back and forth, you still see that one. That's not a very good idea because you can be in a second clip and you're still editing the first clip. So if I select the option, selection follows playhead, look what happens when I move my playhead right there. The playhead automatically selects the clip underneath of it. So if you have any kind of filter or effects applied to it, will be updated inside effect controls. One more thing, because I want to color correct and apply the filter to my adjustment layer, by default, the track 1 is selected because the track 1 destination track is highlighted. I'm going to highlight the track number 2. When I move the mouse, deselect the screen, now look what happens. It selects the track number 2. So a lot of these things, we talk about the editing classes in Premiere, how to do basic editing. We talk about the source and destination tracks, how you use them. That's another usage of it. Some of you might say, you know what, this is a little confusing to me. I don't want to use them. It's not really a choice anymore here because you make one mistake by selecting a wrong track. You move somewhere else. It selects another clip. When you're coming back, it gives you different settings. Then you have to constantly select the correct layer. Otherwise, you will see a wrong color. So I'm just going to select the destination track. As far as the adjustment layer goes, I'm going to put one adjustment layer on each clip as I'm going. But I'm not going to go right now and apply both of them. So I'm going to leave this one. My interface looks good. My Lumetri color looks good. Everything looks correct to go. And I better go to my window workspace and create a new workspace because I don't want to mess things up if accidentally I reset it. So I'm just going to call this thing my March CC. I can access it from here. And right there. And by the way, I made a shortcut on my Premiere called F12. And if I press F12 from the keyboard shortcut, it will reset my interface. So in a color correction, I always move things around a little bit. Like this thing has to be adjusted like this because I need to see the keyframes to animate them, something like this. And then once I'm done with it, I'll press F12 and everything should go back exactly to what it was, just like this, very, very quickly. So I'm ready to go now. Let's just start by looking at the Lumetri scopes. The scope right now I have here is for Rgb Parade and also something called a vector scope. I don't need neither of those things when I'm doing a primary grading. So let me talk about the color correction. In the world of color correction, you need to have 3 stages. Stage 1 is called the primary. The primary grading is when you make a white and you make a black color level all line up. In a way, you're creating a white balance. So once you've done the primary, now primary itself can get into the 2 different parts. What I mean about 2 different parts, because in order to white balance it, you need to adjust the black and white called the Luma. So we're going to adjust that one. And then the second one is the chroma that we have to adjust. The color, the RGB. That's what this Rgb Parade panel you see here is for correcting the chroma. I need a panel to correct the Luma. This vector scope is for saturation. So that's not for what I need to do. I used it yesterday session because if some of you were there yesterday, I remember one of the videos I had with the iPhone, it was a bit too saturated, so I needed to tone it down using a vector scope. So once I've done the primary, we move on to the secondary. Now, the secondary color correction is a tough one. Very, very tough one. That's the time is the most time consuming and the most expensive one if you try to do color correction. Primary, I can get away with it by, let's say, 10-20 minutes per clip. Secondary might take a weeks per clip. Why, you asking? Because that's the time you start tracking objects, changing things. Like the video I showed you about the girl earlier, changing her eye color, changing the lips, changing her hair, changing the shade of her face, cleaning the background color, making this background green, and that is called the secondary. Now, of course, the other one, she's in the water, she's moving in the water because as you can see, the camera and the water move her around. So if I try to track her face moves up and down. Her face needs to be tracked. And her hair, the water, everything has to be adjusted. That is called the secondary. Your mileage varies on secondary. Depends on the quality of the clip, how much time you want to spend, and so on. It's just a lot of stuff you got to do. By the way, I'm loading the original clip here in my source panel so we can compare before and after once we're done with the adjustment layer. So here it is. Let's start. I'm going to right click in the Lumetri scope, turn my Rgb Parade off, and select my waveform. I don't need a histogram at the moment, and I'm going to get rid of the vector scope. This is the beginning of a color correction. You need to be in something called a waveform. Now be careful with the waveform. Waveform has multiple modes. For example, YC mode that show you the Luma and Chroma at the same time. Bad idea most of the time. And this one is basically the waveform with the color with no chroma, and the RGB version, which is even worse than that. There are too much information there for me to process. I see a red, green, and blue color in all over the places. I need to simplify it by selecting the Luma. Luma will display simple white and a black. So in here, when I'm looking at it, the scope itself at 100 is the white level. So that's white. 0 is black. Now, if you're producing a video for North American broadcast, we have to follow the rule called IRE 7.5. IRE 7.5 rule is the lowest value of the black is at 7.5 level. So it's not at 0, it's at 7.5. That's the one. And the highest value for a white has to be 100, which is right here. So if you look at this clip, the lowest part of a shadow is slightly off the 7.5, and the highlight is slightly off the 100. So already I know I need to adjust the white and adjust the black. However, in reality, how much of a white I want or how dark I want the blacks to be, that's a bit tricky. Because you're going to say, well, I don't want to have it completely black. Even at 7.5 is not completely black. Because if you convert the IRE to an RGB, IRE 100 is not 255, it's a 235 RGB. And if I convert 7.5 to RGB, you got 16. So think about it. You go to Photoshop and create 16 gray level. Red, green, and blue equal to 16. And put it beside the black. You know that's not black. That's why when you guys load a video in Premiere and you click on a little camera at the bottom down here, inside your program panel to take a snapshot, save it as a JPEG or a TIFF or a PNG, bring it to Photoshop, and a picture and a video looks like a washed out. The reason for it is the IRE. Now, if you're working in Japan, IRE in Japan is actually IRE 0. The NTSC in Japan is slightly contrastier than what we use in North America. Remember, these rules are set in 1950s. So back then, nobody had a OLED screen or LCD screen or a plasma. They had an old tube TV, so they had to, work with what they had. That's why the HDR screens are way higher than this. So let's try to see what we can do with this clip. Now, if I move the playhead to the next one, you realize the next one has a completely different sets of color and the brightness. If I want to match these two, that looks like from the same footage, I have to make sure the white and the black are identical. Otherwise, it just look kind of weird. So to begin with, I start by looking at the Lumetri. In Lumetri, there are multiple stages. You can have a basic correction, then you have curves, then you have a color wheels, then you have a HSL secondary. These ones are responsible for color correction. And don't get me wrong, you guys, if you don't want to use a Lumetri, it's fine. You can use very much any color correction filter in Premiere and achieve exactly what I'm going to do with the Lumetri. And these are the color correction filters in Premiere that you can basically achieve the same thing. Oh, there's a couple of more left. There. These are filters. All of these things do exactly the same thing. The reason I'm using Lumetri, because Lumetri is a very powerful one, and Adobe purchased it from a different company that made a program called a SpeedGrade, which was a very, very powerful program. So we're going to use that one. I'm going to start by going to the basic correction to show you guys how it's done in a very basic form. I'm going to grab an option called exposure. When I move the exposure up and down, you guys look at what happened to the graph. The graph immediately reacts to it. So remember, I'm not going to look at this screen and decide, you know what, this is bright enough. I have no idea how this monitor displaying the screen. But when I'm looking at the Lumetri scopes, I can see I'm getting very close to the white. If I go too much, I'm going to crush the white right there. The white is crushed. So I'm going to pull it back a little bit. Once I've done that, as you notice that the exposure also in many different programs called gamma, it moves the whole thing up and down. So if I put the exposure back again to default, notice that my shadow, for example, used to be around 10, but once I move my exposure up, my shadow went up too. Is around what, 13, 14, 15. So I need to bring my shadow down. There's an option for it called shadows and blacks. Don't make a mistake between shadows and blacks. They're not the same thing. Think about, let me use a highlighter again. The 100. Think about somewhere between 90 and 100 around here is called white. Somewhere between 10 and 0 is black. Somewhere between 10 and 20 to 25 is shadow. Somewhere between 90 and about 80, 85 is highlight. And then rest in the middle is the midtone. So if I want to bring the shadow down, I'm not going to grab black because there's no black here yet. It's not in a black zone yet. So I bring the shadow and I bring the shadow down. As you guys can see, there's a lot more into the color correction than for me to just jump into it to start doing a color correction without giving you guys a bit of information at first. So I'm going to grab the shadows And as I'm bringing a shadow down, you guys can see it's coming down a little bit. Now, I'll bring it down to the minimum level I can drag it into at minus 100. And there's nowhere I can go lower than that. Now, if you look inside my Lumetri, maybe I can magnify this thing. This is 10 and this is 0. And if you really think about it, that's almost like a 7.5, isn't it? It's a little bit higher than a middle. Let's just say 7.5 is a difficult one. The old Premiere used to have a dotted line here, but Adobe removed it. Also, I'm going to remove the option called a clamp signal at the bottom because it's not a good idea. I don't want to clamp it. If you want to bring it slightly lower, because it's under 10 now, I can use the blacks now. Look, there. Again, for me, I try to keep it around the 5 because there's no 7.5 line in there, so I can't really see it properly. I leave it around 5. Now, immediately, if you guys look at the clip is a bit more saturated and contrasty. Look, looks like we had a little fog on the screen, and I just removed it. Now remember, I can do the same thing with levels too, right? The same filter. I can use the levels, I can use curves, because it doesn't matter what filter you use, as long as the color correction filter you use does have highlights and shadows somewhere in there, which levels has, curves has, HSB has, many different filters. 3-way color corrected, 1-way color corrector, Rgb color corrector. Oh, God knows, there's 30 of them in Adobe Premiere. So that looks good. Now I'm going to look at the RGB level. I'm going to right click and select Parade RGB. Remember, Parade by default could have a different mode. Let me get rid of the waveform and make this thing a little bit nicer. If I select the Parade into a YUV is a bad idea, because YUV displaying the Luma, chroma red and blue, and chroma blue and yellow. So it's kind of like really weird. And then when you add them up together, it becomes green. If you have a 3 RCA cable behind your TV or your Blu-ray player called YCRCB, those are a 3 colors. So I have no idea what's going on here because it's very difficult for me to understand it. That's why I always use the RGB. The RGB is a lot easier because each channel has his own color. Now, when I'm looking at these 3, what do you see in here is each individual channel, red, green, and blue, are separated between, again, the white on the top and a black level at the bottom. Just like when you go to levels in Photoshop and you select the RGB and then select a R for a red or green or blue channel. Have you noticed that when I'm looking at the red channel, red has a very nice highlight or white, but when it comes to shadow, the red shadow is a little bit shorter than the green. The green is a kind of like a correct level, so that's okay, but the red is a little short on a shadow. So if you look inside the shadows, a lot of you guys done a print before, you know what I'm talking about. When you're printing things that you have too much blue in there, it's not printed black, you got like a navy blue on a printer. And here, if I'm looking very carefully, the shadows are not exactly black. They are a bit green in there because green is the darkest one. And when I'm looking at the blue shadows are actually look nice, but the blue highlight is there too. But there's something lacking. It's called the midtone. This is the midtone of a color. Very tricky to adjust. You guys can tell the red and green are not bad, but the blue is way off. Now you know why this thing is all yellowish and orangish, because there's a lack of blue in the midtone. Now you're gonna say, wait a minute, everything you say, I buy it, except this is supposed to be the golden hour, right? This is supposed to be look orangish. I understand that. But you cannot make the next clip orangish because you're guessing. The first rule of color correction is you have to make sure everything is white balanced. Once everything is a white balanced, then you can make it like an orange like that if you want to. Otherwise, there's no way you can line up multiple colors or multiple clips. Even I want the end result look like this, no problem. I make it for you. But I need to make sure this is balanced. This is balanced. Once the white and a black and mid-tone of the two clips line up, these two clips will match. Then we add an orange or an amber, a golden hour or sunset color on both of top of both of them. Then we make them both look identical. That's how you color correct. That's called secondary. So I'm going to start by going into the curves because I need to individually adjust each color. And the basic correction, there's a temperature adjustment. I'm not going to touch that. Very, very tricky to deal with. I'm not going to click on a white balance because white balance is only useful when you have a test chart or a white balance or a white sheet in front of it. You know, in movies, they use clappers. You can use that as a reference, but I don't have any. Not on these clips. So I'm going to go to the curves. Curves are very, very tricky in Adobe Premiere. Way, way, way harder than Photoshop. So if you want to learn curves, I would recommend you guys learn it in Photoshop first. Then you come back to Adobe Premiere. And as you can see, there's a lot of them. So I'm going to start by going to the red channel. Remember I said the red has a problem with the shadows? I need to fix that. So I'll grab the red shadow and I'll pull it forward. As I'm pulling it forward, notice that only red moves. Look. This is the shadow part. And as you can see, I'm crushing it because I pull it inward. Inward crushes the shadows. And if I keep going forward, I can create something like an Andy Warhol effect or create a red silhouette because I crushed the red. As you can probably hear, the fan on my laptop is going crazy right now because it's very computer CPU and GPU demanding when you do things like that in real time. So there, I put it right around here. Funny is if I look at the system spec right now, yeah, I'm using 11.6 gigabyte RAM, which is not bad actually. And the two of my graphic cards at the same time running try to keep up, and the CPU. So if you're doing anything like that on your own home, make sure you use Lumetri because Lumetri is one of those filters in After Effects use graphic cards. So it's a lot quicker. So let's take a look. If I turn the curves on and off, do you guys see a bit of an orange shade used to be in there, now it's gone? Let me magnify this part. Now look inside the shadows. Look, there used to be some sort of red shading there. Now it's gone. Now I'm not done yet with it. I'm just getting started. So when I'm looking at the blue shadow looks nice. So I'm going to leave it as is. By the way, this is technically what I teach in Photoshop with filters like levels. Remember, some of you taking Photoshop classes with us. Remember when we do levels, we do a red, green, and blue, and we adjust the highlights and shadows by dragging a little, the triangle at the end of it called color stops. We moving it back and forth. Or when we teach curves in Photoshop, it's the same thing. Blue highlight. Now I'm going to go to the blue. By the way, I don't usually touch the green channel. Some of you wondering, why don't you touch the green channel? There's a good reason for it. Is because of this called Bayer sensor. The Bayer filter or Bayer sensor is this. This is what a digital camera, a scanner, or your TV or your computer monitor look like. Remember, our computer monitor works with the RGB, right? Same thing with the digital cameras, same thing with the scanners. So somehow that footage comes to this computer being digitized. If originally was shot in a film, has to go to this digitized process anywhere. Like you have to scan it frame by frame. If it was a digital camera, then had some sort of sensor. So what this Bayer sensor is? Bayer sensor is, I believe 99% of the video cameras and scanners in the world and projectors, they use this thing called the Bayer sensor. The Bayer sensor works in, remember, it's an RGB, so it has to be 3 colors. But because your sensor is rectangular shape, has a possible. If you have 3 pixels, red, green, and blue, individual sensors on your scanner, your digital camera, but you have to have a square, has to be 4, or has to be an even number, cannot be an odd number. So they came up with this idea called RGBG in order to make it into an even number. So notice that in the RGB, there's 3 of them, but in the Bayer sensor filters, they use RGBG. So there's 2 green, 1 red, 1 blue. Therefore, the green is twice more accurate than a red and blue. You're wondering why we use a green screen, or I always tell my students when you are using a chroma key or you want to create a blue screen, don't use a blue screen, use a green screen instead. Why? Because your camera will capture green better. Green is one of those primary colors that human eyes is more sensitive to. We like green more, we see it better. So cameras lean towards that. That's all. Another explanation for a green screen is green color by default is brighter than a blue. You guys can see it here, right? So you don't need as much as light to make a good bright green screen. So that's the second purpose we use the green screen. So now you're wondering why I usually use green as my reference track. Simple, because I trust it more than the red or the blue. That's all it is to it. Again, that's the kind of assumption I have, that this footage has the most faithful track that I can trust is a green. So usually I grab a red and a blue and try to match it to the green. Now, the blue highlight. Blue highlight already exists there. I'm not sure if you guys can see it or not. Let me show you. It's right there. I see it. However, if I grab the blue highlight and I move it a little bit more, it gets crushed and it doesn't produce a really good result. I'm going to leave the blue highlight as is. But I'm going to talk about the midtone. The midtone is the trickiest part of the color correction, because you saw the black and white is easy. White is on top here, and the black is on the bottom here. So what's the big deal? Nothing. You just grab the red and pull it down. You grab the blue, push it up on a top and a bottom in the curves. This one, the bottom one always goes to the right to bring it down, and the highlight goes to the left to bring it up. Now, if it's crushed, you can bring it down to squeeze it. Same thing with the red, you can move it up as well. But these two stay usually around that same corner. The midtone is the problem, because very much from a 90 to a 20 in here is our midtones. So I'm going to make it a little bit easy. Let's take a look at a few things. I'm going to pick a couple of spots. I really hope this is going to help for you guys to kind of understand what I'm trying to do. If I look at this green here, that, to be honest with you, it looks like a little Christmas tree, this green. When I look at this curve and look at this curve, have you guys noticed that this area on the red is higher? Like this part, look at this little cut here. Remember, if I move the playhead, I have a different pattern. So I try not to do that usually. And this area, same area on a green, is lower. This area looks like a little upside down V shape, is way higher on the red, isn't it? This will give me some ideas that red midtone is higher than a green midtone. And towards this part being stretched, if you look at this thing versus that part. So guess what? If I go to the red channel in my curves and I grab the middle of a red, remember, middle of the red channel, I know I'm on a blue channel at the moment because I will swap the mouse later. If I choose this middle part right here, this middle part is at 50% right here. So if I need to bring this thing down, don't you think is around here? Again, I'm guessing most of the time, right? Remember, these grid behind it help me to understand it. That's 100, that's 80, that's 50, that's about 25-ish. That might be 75. So let me do it once and you guys understand the trick. I select the red. So there's a couple of spots I need to bring it down. I need to bring the middle of a red down so that line up this V shape the best I can. So I click in the middle of a red. You see there's a pen appears with the plus, and I click and drag it down. Look what happens. Just like that. Now I'm looking at it. Now, of course, this V now almost lines up, and this thing is much more easier. Look at the little curve there, is around the same area. If I need to bring, for example, this middle part a little bit closer, I need to find out where it is on a curve, like here, for example. I click and I adjust the curve a little bit. Look. You guys understand how powerful this feature is because I can match it exactly to what I want. Problem with the level that we use in Photoshop in a normal color correction is level is a one line, is a linear. That means you can move the whole thing up and down or stretch it. But curves, you can grab a one part of it and move somewhere between 20 and 30 levels. So you can pick a specific spot of a midtone and adjust that one only. Now, red is the easy one. Look at the difference so far. Now let's take a look at the blue. I'm going to select the blue channel. I'm going to repeat the same thing. This needs to go up quite a bit. So I click in the middle of the blue and I bring it up. As I'm doing this thing, look at what happens to the video. Now, if I go too high, I'll try to line them up with the green the best I can. You got to be careful. This line, they call curves. So make sure this line is not in a straight line. So I'm curving it. If I go and make it flat on the top, I'll crush the blue. So that looks good. But I want to bring the middle down a little bit. So I can push this one down slightly. As I'm doing that, notice that the top becomes flat. So I need to bring this thing down a little bit. It's the game of push and pull. Right there. I'm adjusting it. Again, I try to bring this thing up as much as I can without flattening it too much. There we go. Now look at the three of them. If I turn it off, look at the graph. See the difference? Now, I'm not saying this video is perfect or is done. No, 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 no. Far, far, far from it. What I've done in here is if you had your digital camera and you go to outdoor and you shoot it, most likely you will get this. You're not gonna get this unless your camera has a massive white balance issues and or you put a filter on your camera. A lot of us took pictures in a sunset and you might somehow get a picture like that. I have some slides and photos that actually look like this, but they were tricky. If you ask me to reproduce it again, I have to go get the exactly same Kodachrome film I had. I had to have the right lens and right filter on it. I had to have multiple things. It's not something I can just point and shoot and always get the same result. Remember, your phone, your camera phone, your Android and your iPhone, they do the best to try to produce this thing, unless you do, a color filter. By the way, Adobe Premiere has a little icon at the bottom called the global effects mute icon. They call it effects. I added in there, clicking the plus. Just make sure you add that icon to the bottom. And also you want to have another panel called a comparison view. So let me go and find it. This is a reference monitor. And my comparison view is, where did it go? Comparison is right here, sorry. Comparison view. I put it right beside the effects. And I'm going to actually put a spacer in between them, because I don't want to accidentally touch on one versus the other one. That's good. I'm going to click OK. And when I turn the effects off, look at the difference between what it was, what it is now. Now, this is called primary correction. If you recall, the primary correction job is making sure white balance is correct. White is white and black is black. As you notice that my primary and secondary, everything look correct. Now, the next step for me is to repeat the same thing, put in my adjustment layer. Remember, adjustment layers are blank, and do not copy it, because adjustment layer only applies to this clip. So I'll drag another adjustment layer, and I just use a trim tool. I'll go over it. Remember, you see what I told you about the option selection follows the playhead? The moment I go over the next clip, my Lumetri resets, because now it's about this one. If I don't select this option and I stay with this thing, I can look at these clips and say, oh yeah, I want to make changes to it. I'm in a wrong clip. I need to select it, be able to see the Lumetri. If I select a clip, I have a different settings. This becomes very, very, very confusing when you have a lot of layers. You have so many different adjustment layers, becomes very crazy, and you keep moving things around and you say, why don't I see the effect here? Because you select the wrong clip. Selecting the option, selection follows it, no problemo. Look. Now this one should be a lot quicker, because I don't have to explain things as much. I'm just going to do the whole thing. I'm going to play the video. And I'm going to basically, this time, skipping the basic correction for you, because you saw already curves is more powerful, and curves also has the, basically this thing, the whole thing is exposure, white, black, shadows, midtone, all of them are literally in there, in the curves. So I'm going to grab the highlight. I'm going to find the brightest spot here on the video. It's around the 90, okay? The brightest spot I see is around the 90, 80 or 90. You see it? Yeah, around that thing. So I grab the highlight and I move it inward. I don't want to go too far, so I stop it around 90, 95, something like this. Then a shadow, I'm just going to push the shadow forward a little bit up, actually. As you can see, shadow is just set to the 0 right there. And it's a bit crushed, eh? Now you're wondering what's that crush look like, or where exactly is. Well, if you guys grab the Lumetri scope and literally take it off here, like slice it out, and place it on top of the video, this is right here. This is somewhere here. Now I'm not sure it's in this window or this window or this door. These two dots here, these two blacks, this one is here, this window, and the other one is right this one. Remember, that's shadows, that's highlight. This is the left side of the screen, which is right this side. That's the right side of the screen, which is right here. So this little sky here, right here, it's right there. I know that looks weird at first. You just say, wow, that's kind of how that works, because the spatial properties are the same thing. They just move up and down. This little tower here, this part is a mid-tone, isn't it? It's right here. See? That's the color of a tower. The reason this is a part is empty because the tower blocking it. You guys can see the tree. See the tree here? The tree is dark, right? It's right here. See the lines? Cut through it? Because the tree is right there. This is a tree. Remember, this is shadows, blacks down here, and the whites are up there. It's a lot easier to understand it than a Photoshop histogram, trust me. So I need to move my black up. I grab the graph and I move it upward a bit to about halfway between 0 and 10. Again, I know I try to stay with 7.5, but it's difficult to see it, so I'm guessing around 5. Now I'm changing it to Rgb Parade. You guys notice that if you have one or multiple monitors, this is a lot easier to make this panel really large and put in a different monitor and having the two things at the same time. Let's take a look. Have you noticed the blue is kind of crushed on the top? I have to bring the brightness of down because the blue is crushed. Again, I'm going to use the green as a reference. Green highlight looks great. Green shadows looks great. Red is good. Red highlights a little bit lacking, so it has to go up a little bit. The blue highlight has to come down a little bit, and the blue shadow looks okay. Now the midtone. This is my midtone area because that's a building, if you remember that. That was the part of the building was missing. Look at this area. Look at this area. Look at this area. What kind of patterns they give you? That red midtone has to go higher. The blue midtone has to go lower. Now, I'm not going to touch the blue midtone immediately. I'm going to bring the blue highlights down. This might actually help. The rest of it is not bad. This area is very, very similar in the shadows. Again, if I bring this thing up, this most likely will go up a little bit. And the blue is too high. And I bet you blue will come down a little bit. So let's take a look. See what else we can do with this. I start by going to see my Luma as well. You probably see the blue is crushed, but I don't see any crushing here. So I'm going to go to red channel. I have to pay attention to the blue quite a bit. I need to move the red up. So I'll select the red highlight and I move it. Told you the middle one will line up. If it doesn't, just grab the mid red and push it up a little bit. And the red shadows moved up tiny. So I'll push the red shadow back again to where it was. Now, I'm not done yet. I just fixed the red channel. Look at the video. Have you noticed that? The sky is not that blue anymore. It has a little bit of more natural color to it. And I go to the blue channel. And I need to bring the blue down. Blue, unfortunately, is crushed. You see there's these lines? Now, I'm not sure that was the original clip. The blue was crushed or something I did with the Luma. So I'm grab my Luma and I try to push my Luma down. You see it? I crushed it. Right there. So I'm going to bring it down a little bit. I'm not going to touch the highlight. Let me put the highlights back. I'll go to the blue and I fix the blue by moving it down a little bit to line them up with the red, green, and blue. Adjust the middle of the midtone blue. Now you see this is more like a grayish. I go back to RGB, then I push it. Notice that the blue is crushing. Again. Strange, isn't it? I think that's the file lacking the blue, because I can't fix this thing. Blue always got crushed around that area, which is fine. Again, I believe that's not really my fault, is the way the camera was originally. The camera crushed it. So that's a good thing to have a good camera, right? That's why movies, they use a very expensive cameras, like a red camera. They shoot raw because they can maneuver, they can push it to the maximum and get what they want without losing and crushing colors. Now, this white balance is done too, the primary. Again, look at the difference, and thank God we have an adjustment layer. Remember, I haven't done anything to adjust them. When I play them, these two now, they have the same white and the same shadows. These two clips. If I put them in a comparison view, I know the colors are a little bit different because one of them is there, the highlights and shadows. Look at the comparison view. I can have two frames side by side, and if you look at the highlights and shadows, they match very, very or close. This one I made a little bit brighter because it's the sun, right? So you guys can look at the RGB too. Remember, RGB being split in between two with the comparison view. Now, once it's done, I'm going to go with the adjustment layer, and I put another adjustment layer on top. Why I put in one over both of them? Because this adjustment layer, I have to select the video tree. This will ensure that the color correction applies to all of them. In this case, I'm going to go to the creative, and from the creative, I'm going to pick a look. For example, we want to create a very interesting look. How about SL Blue Steel? If I use the SL Blue Steel, now look, both of them, they have exactly same shade of a blue and a color. But I want to go with the golden hour, let's say called the gold heat. There. This is what a gold heat look like. I can go and select the orange. Next one. Something like this. This is the correct one. Of course, I can go and adjust the intensity to make it more or less. You notice that the building has the same shade of an orange now versus what it was. Well, this is original, by the way. If I select the color and load it in there, look at the difference that we have made between these clips. So primary, secondary. If this thing was blue, there was no way you can line up the blue with this one. No way. So as you can see, this is secondary. Again, I'm secondary. I'm just going to do this thing very simple in the first exercise, at least, what I'm showing. But as we go forward, I'm going to show you more and more. There are a lot of artistic things you can do. I'll show you one little trick here. For example, in Adobe Premiere, you guys can go to opacity and change the blending from normal to overlay. If I do this thing, I'm technically baking it inside, so I'm creating a bleach effect. You see the difference? Again, this is a Photoshop technique that it can create a bleach effect. Look at the difference between normal and an overlay. This is called the bleaching. I can go to the soft light. Don't go to the multiply. That make it really, really dark, unless you want to create something look like this. But again, thanks to the adjustment layer, I can blend them using the Photoshop blending techniques. I'm going to save my project at the moment. And as I said, this exercise that I showed, just want to talk about the Lumetri scopes and color correction and everything else. So it takes usually longer than if I actually do something with it. The next exercise, the next example I'm going to show you, I have these two clips of these two girls. I gotta line them up. So I'm gonna do the basic color correction between these two clips, try to match them, and then we're gonna go over the more details. Details like changing the eye color or the lips color, that requires masking. Masking requires tracking and so on. So let me create a timeline from this clip. First of all, I'm gonna grab this clip and drag it over create a new timeline. And I'm gonna call the first one, I guess they call the dark house. I'm gonna call this thing example 1. And this one, I'm just gonna call this thing example 2. The other clip I have is this one. I'm just gonna put that clip right again behind them, right there. As usual, I don't need to make a new adjustment layer. Adjustment layer I made is a blank adjustment layer. So I can drag one adjustment layer literally anywhere I want. That's why I don't rename the adjustment layer to something else. Unless you have an adjustment layer, one for a filter, one for a color correction, you can go ahead and do that, but I'm just gonna leave mine as is. I'm dragging the adjustment layer on the top layer and making sure my layer number 2 is my, look, they should be followed now. There we go. So let's try this. This time I'm gonna keep the Luma and Chroma at the same time, so we can see it better. I don't need the creative part. I'm gonna go to the curves directly, and let's take a look. By looking at the Luma, you guys can see the highlights and shadows, red, green, and blue, are much more balanced than the Harbor. So I need to just adjust the minor things, like, a little bit of the shadows, just a little bit of a highlight. Oops, you got to be very careful. By the way, if you accidentally click in the middle of it, and then you wanted to click on the top, but you click close to the top, don't worry, just go elsewhere, double click in here, it resets it. So I'm going to grab a highlight and I'm just going to move it up just a tad, very, very little. I got to bring it down a little bit because my green is got crushed. I'm going to keep an eye on this thing too. Now this is a clean one, and then the shadow. Let me see what I can do. Come on, shadow. Move a bit down. That's good. I'm going to go to the red channel. Red shadow need to be fixed just a little bit. Red highlights need to be fixed. Same thing with the green. Actually, green is not too bad, but I'm going to make sure the green shadow is a little bit lower. Why? Because I didn't want to crush the Luma here. And then I go to the blue and adjust the blue shadow just a bit. Just a bit. Not bad. Now, come on down a little bit. That's good. Now the mid-tone. I'm going to grab the blue mid-tone and push it up a little bit. I want to line up this area, and this one has to come down just a bit. Like this. That's actually not too bad. A little bit lower. There you go. And then I go to the red, and red has this area that I have to think about. However, you got to be careful. She has a red hair naturally, so, or at least appear in that movie. I gotta think that red has to be a strong color there. Sometimes you have to look at the clip itself. If I just push the red down too much, like this thing, and then bring it down, it doesn't look good. See? So I have to sometimes look at the clip itself and adjust it based on the visual appearance of the clip. So I'm not really worried about this doesn't line up. let's take a look at a before and after. Now you guys see there used to be a shade of a red on top of it. The shade is gone. Is it me or the clip actually looks sharper? It's got more details in there, especially the skin part. So that's my primary. I'm gonna move on to the next clip. Next clip doesn't have much of a highlights in there, despite I see some water splashes that they look very white. Remember, water can have a splashes of reflections like these ones right there. So let me double check it. Oh yeah, they are there. I don't know how well you guys can see it on the monitor, but there's a lot of them. Look. So I got to pay attention to those little guys as well, because they are part of the clip anyway. So when your graph is so small, you may not see it, but definitely there are one. So I'm going to start by going to the highlight and try to push it up. Remember, if I do this thing too much, I can make a video very bright and I'm crushing those white ones. Now, you're going to say, well, they were crushed anyway. They're just the white dots. Should I care? Well, this is a tricky one, tricky situation. If I put on other clips beside it, you can see that this one has a white. You can see her shirt is really, really white there. So I have to pay attention to that. But also, this is more saturated in the face. So I'm going to adjust that one later on. So I'm going to be careful with this thing, not pushing it too far up. I'm going to leave the white as is. As I said, there's a lot of white in there, reflection in the water right there. When it comes to shadows, I think shadows looks good. I don't need to touch it anything. Then I go to the red channel. And again, her face has a lot of red. I'll see if I can boost the red up to a little bit higher. I'm paying attention to the reflections. I don't want to go too high. So I'm going to leave it around the 90. Shadow looks good. Green shadow need to be adjusted just a bit. Very low. And then the green highlight need to be adjusted. Now, if I bring the green highlight too much, you definitely see there's a bit of a green will be added in there. I'm looking at this area right now. At 100, the green got crushed. Remember, those are the reflections, right? So I'm going to pay attention to that and pull it back just a little bit. That's better. I don't see green much. I'm talking about this spot right here. I'm going to go to the blue, and I'm going to adjust the blue as well, or bring it up a little bit. As I'm doing that, look at the difference so far. This doesn't look as much, but I need to adjust the midtones for a red. I'm going to go to midtone of a red and try to line them up with the green. So I'm bringing it up, the midtone, and then I go to the blue. I need to bring the blue midtone down a little bit. Now, as you can see, if I follow the rules, try to line them up, in this case, it doesn't work. It actually gets way, way worse than what it was, because I crushed the red. This is a very, very tricky clip thanks to those little white sliders. See, you're going to say the original was actually better. I agree. So I'm going to go to the red. I'm going to reset it. Notice that my curves in the blue was just like the concave version. I think I should just push the red midtone up a little bit. And I go to the blue and I push the blue slightly higher in the midtone. And I should be all right. Right there. Yeah, the blue, unfortunately, in this clip, this is a very tricky clip. The blue gets always a bit twisted no matter what I do. But don't worry, that's the best I can get with the primary correction. Again, none of these things that look very good. I feel like a red is too much on this one because if I need to color match it, I'll bring the red down a little bit. Try to line them up with the other one. Remember, after all, my goal is line up these two clips, right? So if I show you side by side, do you see that red is way too high? I'll bring the red down a little bit, try to line them up right there. I'll do the same thing with the green, just a bit, and I do the same thing with the blue. Blue is actually not too bad. Now they're lined up. If you look at the two clips side by side, they're very, very similar. This one is a bit more saturated, by the way. But you guys can tell how the skin look like before and after. Now I'm going to show you the secondary. Secondary for this thing, I need another adjustment layer. Oops, making sure to not put it on top of the other one. I'm going to use it on top right here. On the secondary, I'm going to start by selecting a specific spots. Then I'm going to color correct that spot. For example, I want to make her face slightly brighter. If I go to my effect controls, I already have one Lumetri that controls it. Maybe I should remove this one. And I do the secondary on the same Lumetri. Make it a little bit easier. You guys can see Lumetri. I'm going to right click on it, rename it. I'll call this thing primary. Now if I need a second Lumetri, I'll go to the effects and I type Lumetri. Lumetri color is a filter, right? I drag it over. Now the second Lumetri filter appeared. I'm going to right click on it, rename it to secondary. Or just secondary. There you go. But secondary is not enough. I'm going to rename it just, you know what? I'm just going to call this thing face. When it comes to face, you see there's a mask here. I'm just going to show you guys by selecting a basic mask. I can grab this mask and put it over her face by rotating the mask. Put it right on her face and just stretching it. As you probably guessed it, I can spend a lot of time to make a very, very good mask, but I'm trying to preserve some time and show you that you can do a lot with this mask. As you can see, I may not be able to line them up properly, but definitely I can go and add an anchor point and adjust certain area. Like for example, her chin need to be adjusted. This works the best if I magnify my screen and I don't want anything else to kind of adjust there. Here you go. That's the line, right? I try to find out where the line is for her chin is. And here it is. That looks good. For the moment, of course. Now, as I said earlier, I'm lucky that she's not moving on the screen and the camera is fixed. Because look, even she moves a little bit, it's fine. We can ignore that. Now, by having something like this, I can simply go to my curves and I can make her face slightly brighter. Now, this only affects her face. Look. So I can make her face slightly brighter. As you can see, there's only portion of it will be affected by. This can be a mid-tone or could be a highlight. For a face, usually I go with a mid-tone because a face is a mid-tone, it's not a highlight, except the part of the eye, the white part of the eye, or reflection in the eye, that I need to boost it up a little bit. I'm exaggerating here. So if I play the clip without the mask, see her face is brighter? Look at the difference. Now, obviously, if I zoom in and being very picky, this is actually not bad. See? When I'm looking at it, it actually looks pretty good. However, I have an option of feathering the mask. Mask has a feather of 10. I can feather it by more. Now, if I do this thing, I can give her face a bit of a glowing effect. You can tell, okay? Now, that might be the better choice. I don't know at the moment. You got to talk to the art director. See? Versus the having a very, very sharp edge of a mask right there. This is a sharp mask. Maybe I should make this screen larger. Some of you on a smaller mobile devices, look at this edge right there. Do you want something like this? Or you want something like this? That looks kind of weird. I can adjust how much of a light I want to create. Do I want to make her face flat, or I want to give her face some sort of character? I'll go with something large. This is my feather I'll choose, around 30. Is it 30? Oh, sorry, 200. Woo. I mean 300-ish. The good news is I can even boost this thing up a little bit more because I feathered it, shouldn't cause much of a problem. Right there. Now you guys can see and understand why secondary will take forever, because the amount of work I have to do. Every part of her face has to be adjusted and has to have a different mask. Obviously, I can make her face much more saturated and adjust the color by basically going to Lumetri and make it more saturated. For example, if I want to make her more saturated, everything I do applies to the mask, so I'm kind of safe with that. I'm not going to do this thing too much, but if I want to make her face slightly more redder, I go to the red. I need to see my scopes. Sorry, I'm just going to squeeze this thing down a little bit, and I can make her face slightly a little bit more red. However, be careful. I'm going to make her hair really red, so I don't want to make her face too much of a red, but I just want to give her face a little bit of more of a saturation. I can also use a option here called saturation, hue versus saturation. I can saturate certain colors only. Now at the moment, this is what I have. It looks like a vignette, isn't it? Now her hair should be done very, very easily. Again, I'll go to my effect controls, collapse the face. Remember, that controls the face. And I grab another Lumetri, drag it over, and I call this one hair. Obviously, I need a mask to cover the hair. That shouldn't be a very big deal. What I need is a mask that covers the hair. Now, Photoshop users probably going to say, well, I could have used the face, but if I invert it, I will get everything but the face, which is correct. But for a hair, I'm just going to go create a one with a pen tool. I'm going to make a rough one, something, again, look like this. I will fix that later. I can't go really around the edge and click anyway. So I'm going to make this thing full screen. And I also changed the settings to 50 or 75%. Actually, 100% should be all right. So I can pull these things outside. The reason I'm pulling it outside, because I'm going to feather the hair. And if the edge of a hair feather is within the boundaries of the screen, what's going to happen is it creates some sort of weird glowing effect around it. So I'm just going to go with something like this. Now, do I need to curve it? I mean, I can hold the Alt key just like Photoshop or Illustrator and curve it if you wanted to. Not a big deal. Same thing with here. I can curve. But all of these things has to be adjusted due to the fact after I apply the red color, I want to see how much of a glowing effect is going to create. So something look like this. Something like this. Let's try to preserve her ear the best I can. Not bad. Let's see. Now again, I'll go to Lumetri. This is the Lumetri hair. And I can definitely make her hair red. There you go. That depends on how much you want. There's so many options in there that if I keep expanding it, you guys can see I have so much option that I can do color correction. Again, in this class, I'm not going to talk about this secondary key coloring yet, because definitely is way past the scope of this class or this session. But I'm just going to stay with the curve, because even you guys understand and learn the curve, you learn a lot from a color correction standpoint of view. So here, look at the difference. Before and after. Now the edge. The edge is very straightforward. The edge is the mask and a feather. So all I need to do, just feather it properly. It's gone. Sharp, feather. This controls the hair. This controls the face. Here it is. Now I'm going to do one more. I still got 2 minutes before we take a short coffee break. And the one I'm going to do this time is the lips. And then after coffee break, I will do at least one of the eyes very, very quickly. The lips is easy. All I need is a magnifier to a larger number. Remember, I need to see it really well. And I just use the pen tool. I start from the top, click. Most likely I need a point here, need a point here, here, and then close. The rest of it should be all right. Let me put my mask feather to 0 so it won't bug me when I'm adjusting this. That is actually done. Yeah, there we go. So this will be placed at the bottom here. This will be roughly there. This in the middle is all right. And these guys are in the right spot. Now you got to be careful with the lips, because when you try to color correct it to create a lipstick, for example, the lipsticks they have a very sharp edge, or sharper edge at least, and I have to be very, very careful. And she's moving her lips a little bit in this case. Should be all right. If you worry about it, I can do a bit of a tracking. The lips should be all right if I track it. Let me put it at 100%. And I'm just going to make sure that I'm setting the position. I'm going to track it backwards. Very, very small amount. Yeah, that looks actually pretty good. It tracked it properly. I should have a lot of keyframes here. I'll go to the last one, and I'm gonna track it forward. I'm gonna talk about the tracking after initial coffee break. in almost 30 seconds. But right now, once I've done with that, if I zoom into the video and move my playhead around, you will see the mask is actually moving with the lips. You see it? So therefore, if I go to my Lumetri color and I, for example, I want to make the lips a bit darker. Again, this is just a test. If I play it, you can see the mask moves with it. See? Obviously, as I said, I'm not here to tell you what color to choose for the lips. I'm showing you the basic color correction. The rest of it, what you want to do with this is up to you. You can go and do a color correction. You can just shift the color. You can boost the color. You can use a hue. You can do whatever you want with it. That becomes more like a personal preference. For me, is the idea of applying a bit of a feather to it. I don't want to make it too much, as you can see. That's the tricky part about the feather in a lipstick. I'm not an expert in that one, so I would just say this is too sharp. This is too blurry. Again, do you want to create a lipstick effect, or you want to create someone's lips is just naturally look like that? If that's the case, I can make it more feather. Then I need to use a mask expansion because I need to make the mask smaller. Otherwise, the lips will just look too big. So I make a mask expansion smaller. This looks like she doesn't have a lipstick, but her lips just look like that. Or I can put this thing to 0, reduce the amount of the feather to make it looks like actually being it's a lipstick. Can go to the red and I can boost the red a little bit, especially in the shadows, and tighten the highlights because I don't want to make it look unnatural. Also, when you do something like this, usually I need to desaturate it because once you apply these sorts of things, the red color becomes too saturated. It looks kind of unnatural. So I'll go to the hue versus saturation. I'll grab a red and then knock the red down. This, I can also make it into a gothic, but I need to make the red desaturated. So I make a bunch of keyframes and then I grab a red and reduce the red. This can reduce the saturation of a red color down only. Just a little bit. In case you use this filter elsewhere in the project. Too strong, reduce it down, reduce this thing down. And here's the video. Again, this is just a test of what we can do. I'm going to save my project. We're going to take a 15 minutes coffee break. After 15 minutes is over, I'm going to come back and fix the eyes on her. And then we're going to take a look at this one. Same thing. I'm going to try to track her and adjust the hair to the same way this one was. One last part I got to do is this little green section in the background. That should be very easy, right? Gonna go to my effect controls and collapse everything. I need another Lumetri, drag it over, and I will just rename this thing to background, for example. And all I need to do for the background, just create a simple mask. I will create something like this. Let's say a triangle, it will do. As long as this triangle is it's outside of the boundaries of the screen, I should be all right. Sometimes, I wish Adobe Premiere give us an option, just like After Effects, use a mouse wheel to magnify the program panel. It's not a compositing program or motion graphics like After Effects that you need to zoom in and out constantly, but would be nice if give us a mask like this to use. It would be nice to let us to magnify also the screen. This is kind of outdated and looks pretty old school. This should be easy. I'm just going to go to green and just going to boost the mid green. There we go. Something like this. That should be all right. I mean, I can push the blue a little bit into it, just a bit. And all I need to do, just select the mask and feather it. How much, I don't know. This is a feather line. So you can decide how far I want to go with this thing. Also, if you think the edge is a little bit off, don't bother to recorrect the mask, especially when I have another point of a mask is hidden. I just use a mask expansion. The mask expansion should be able to adjust it. Remember I told you guys, always try to put the points that are outside of the screen way outside of the screen, because if I try to expand or contract the edge there, I might run into a little bit issue with the edge, unless you want to create a vignette effect. So these are little tricks you learn when you're working with Premiere or After Effects that helps quite a bit by pushing the points, any points outside of the screen, just push it far away from the screen. So whatever you do with the feather and a mask expansion is not going to damage the edge or not going to run into any kind of issues. Now the eyes. Again, the background was just an extra little thing. The eyes are a little bit tricky because, first of all, I need to track the eyes. Let me double check the eyes, first of all. If I play the clip, I'm going to magnify her face to about 400%. Right there. I'm going to place the mouse at the center of the eye, and I'm going to let it play. Actually, it's not bad. I think her lips moved more than her eyes does. Her eyes moves a very little. All right. Thing about the Premiere tracking is Premiere Tracker is a planar tracker similar to Adobe After Effects, because Adobe used that. So what that planar tracker means, it can track a shape. For example, shape of an eye can be tracked. But this, I'm talking about when I say eye, I mean pretty much the pupil part of an eye. Premiere cannot track the eye when she blinks. Why? Because the shape of the pupil is different. It can track this shape, not this shape. Because she blinks, it might lose a track there. So I'm going to do this thing. Let me see. She blinks at the same time, doesn't she? Yeah. Yeah, that's all right. I'm going to start by grabbing a Lumetri color, drag it over, and I will rename it. You know what? I will create a. Oh, hold on a second. Yeah, I think so. Eyes, because I can make 2 Lumetris, 1 per each eye. I think that will be a waste of time. So yeah, I think I'm gonna go with a 1 filter. However, remember, if a filter in Premiere can have an unlimited mask. That doesn't mean you should do that. Your computer probably won't be able to handle it. And I need to start from the beginning, because the beginning her eyes are in a correct shape. I start with the literally, yeah, a circle. I make it as small as possible. and that's one. I haven't fixed it yet. You guys realize now why I told you a quick zoom into the screen would have been a nice touch by Adobe, especially when you're doing a miniature work like that and a very small area. So the eye, most likely, her eye is actually angled this way. So I'm just going to go with something look like this. Now, definitely, I need to adjust the curvature of it. I could have just used a pen tool, right? Some of you probably going to say, why don't you? It's probably easier because I'm adjusting a lot of things on it. Here it is. I mean, I will apply a little bit of feather to it. It's not a big deal. I'm not trying to make this thing very precise. It's not very visible from that area. After all, I'm at 400% anyway. So I think this looks pretty good. I'm going to put it back to fit. And also, I'm going to put my feather to 0. Remember, I can always do the feather anytime I want. I'm going to right click on a mask one. I'm going to rename it to the, well, technically that's my left. So I call it, you know what, I just call it L. And I can right click again on it and copy it. That's right. You can copy and paste the mask. Paste. Now, as you can see, I have a 2 mask. This mask, I rename it to R for the right eye. Did I rename it? I thought I did. Oh, sorry, I hit the enter rather than hitting a shift key. By the way, there are 2 masks over each other, so I need to really zoom into it and move one to the other eye. I put it back where it was, and I try to select the mask itself. It's come on. Did I move something on the screen? Because a hand tool does let me to move things around unless I go program the keyboard. This is kind of awkward now because the 2 masks over each other, and I really like to grab one of them and move them around, but it won't let me to move it that easily. Usually I just make a new mask, but this time I try to save some time. As you can see, it's not really saving me much of a time. Maybe I can grab it. Nope. It just goes with the pen tool, which is really bizarre though. Let me see if I can grab the whole thing. You know what? Forget it. Just gonna delete this thing. Delete it, cut it out, and leave only one mask. I'm just gonna make a new one. The other side. Where's my hand tool? I better go and adjust the keyboard shortcut and make a new mask here. This time I'm just gonna go with the pen directly. Right there. This will be good enough. I'll call this thing right. So feather to 0, holding a Alt key and making the minor adjustments, and here it is. And the bottom one. Again, I should have just done that from the beginning. All right. Oops, that shouldn't be there. That looks good. First thing I need to do, I need to start with a 1 mask here. And I need to actually track the eye, see what it would look like. So I'm gonna go, remember the default tracker is based on a scale, rotation, and position. A scale is when the object moves back and forth, like you zooming in or panning to something in video. She's not moving anywhere. She blinks. That doesn't consider a scale, okay? And because she doesn't rotate, remember, a scale is when you zooming in and out through the video, by object gets larger or smaller. So I'm gonna go back to the settings, put it on position. Technically, the position is the only one that I think it moves. And I click on a forward. Premiere is tracking it. At the moment, I'm wondering about the eye blink. If my finger is on a spacebar, if something goes wrong, oh, I stop it. Stop. Okay. As you can see, when the eye blinked for the first time, Premiere lost track right there. So I need to go frame by frame forward. And in this case, the keyframes already apply. So I don't have to worry about the keyframe, but I need to actually manually adjust it. Like this. Now be careful, if I try to use the arrow keys, the cursor keys on the keyboard, this is not going to work, so I need to actually literally go frame by frame forward. Now this frame, you're going to say, the eye is technically closed. You don't want to apply color correction. What I'm going to do, I'll show you a little trick. There's an option here that says mask opacity. I'll go one frame before it, and I enable the keyframe for mask opacity. Mask opacity means mask visibility. Now when I go one more frame forward, I'll put the mask opacity to 0. That means if I change the color of the eye to whatever, it won't display. Then I go forward frame by frame, and here eye is beginning to open. I'll wait until to see where the eye technically opens up. Here I add another keyframe for it at 0, and the next one eye begins to open. So I'll wait to about here. I'll put the opacity back to 100. So gradually make the eye bluer. Then I go back and adjust the position. This one, the position has to be down here. I guess in this exercise, I'm just going to do a one eye because you will see doing it both eyes will take much longer. And then this one. Some of you are going to say, what about Adobe After Effects? Yeah, you can use the Adobe After Effects for this thing. Most likely the result will be the same, but the mask in After Effects is easier to work with, and you end up with a better option. Easier to use. Why have an extra point in my mask anyway? This is weird. Well, it doesn't matter. I can get rid of the points here. That's getting messy, isn't it? I guess I added 2 points over each other, and one of them can be. I thought I can subtract one. I guess I cannot. It's weird. I'm supposed to be able to delete one, but Premiere won't allow me, which is really weird. Doesn't matter. The eye is so small, it's literally impossible to see it. And the next one again, yeah, there's a 2 points. Definitely there are 2 of them there over each other. The moment eye opens up, it should be all right. By the way, I can always zoom into the timeline and wipe all the garbage keyframes out, so I don't have to overwrite or fix them one by one. I can just go forward from here frame by frame. There you go. And Premiere tracks the new eye for me. Let's see. There we go. So yes, the hiccup is when she actually blinks. Every time she blinks, there's a hiccup. Right there. That's good. The next frame, it got messy. But I don't need to worry about this thing. You know why? Because I can make a mask invisible. Let's do that. I'm going to add a keyframe at 100%. And the next frame, I'll put the opacity to 0. To show you what that means and how that works, here, let me make the eyes blue. Now, when I go with the levels or curves like this, it doesn't look right. So what I need to do, I need to go to some other place. It's called color wheels. In color wheels, I can grab the mid-tone of the eye and I shift it towards the blue. Of course, the shadows, I leave it as is and I shift I'll highlight just the tad too, just a little bit. That should look, again, I'm exaggerating. I can just adjust this thing to make the eyes look kind of nicer. I'm exaggerating because I want to see the mask as I'm working with it. So let's take a look about the mask opacity. Look what happens. See? As the eye begins to open again, I can reposition the mask. Oh yeah, the eyes moves quite a bit. Now I have 3 points. I don't know why I got these many points. I should be able to delete them. For some reason I can add one, but I cannot delete these points. What at least I can do is I can flatten them by turning them into a corner point. Come on. As you can see, Premiere is not exactly very user-friendly when it comes to fixing the points, isn't it? Come on. Twist. And because it doesn't give you much of a precision when it comes to magnifying things, it becomes a bit of a handful. That looks good. And I think I should be able to track it after that. Yep, it's all right. Despite the mask was a bit smaller, I need to make sure the eyes open up completely. I zoom into the timeline. Let me delete all the garbages. And you can see one little tiny monitor is not enough when you do color correction, especially dealing with these sorts of things. The result will be very good though once I'm done with all the tracking. I think that's the last one, last time she blinks. And don't worry about the edge of it. The edge of the eye can be adjusted with the mask expansion and the mask feather. Okay, it's done. So when she opens her eyes again from this point, right here, I'm going to zoom into the timeline because I need to deal with the keyframes. I can push this keyframe forward and keep her eye a little bit blue. Then I go forward and I put another mask opacity about here when the eye is open to 100%. So let's take a look. This eye, only look at the left eye. How's that? Remember this, the video you've seen, right? And I haven't done anything to it yet. I haven't fixed the edge of the eye or anything else. That looks actually not bad. Even the other one that is really off. I'm actually surprised we didn't animate that one at all. It looks actually kind of decent. Let me look at the other eye. Do I really need to track it? Or the other eye actually looks all right. You know what? The other one, I'm not gonna track it. I'm just gonna animate the opacity. So let me just animate the opacity of this one instead. I'm gonna go back, adjust the mask itself. I'm not gonna track it. Make it a little bit wider. And I'm gonna go forward. Thank God I have the keyframe for the other one. So where exactly the mask is happening. So here has to be set to 0. Then I go back a couple of frames and I put it to 100. So let's take a look. Oh, I need to zoom into the timeline and push this thing forward 1 frame. Let's take a look. Very good. There we go. Now I go forward. Again, she's about to open her eyes here. I put another keyframe. I go forward and put it to 100. Now let's take a look. There you go. Works. And again, I will increase the feather. And if I increase the feather a little bit, you can see the edge of a eye will show up. So what I would do is I play with the mask expansion to keep it exactly at the edge of the eye. Same thing with the other eye. Definitely the edge of a mask has to be feathered. And then I need to play with the mask expansion. I believe the eyes looks a little bit too good to be true, but not bad. Again, I just went in here and played with some of these things. You guys can definitely turn into green eyes if you wanted to, if you think that's the one, or purple eyes, or red if you want to look like a witch. But I'm gonna go with that easy, mild one. Something, this is slightly too bright, so I'm gonna tone the brightness down on the mid-tone, like this. But if you want to make it very unrealistic, then you can just sit down and play with the values again. Remember, you can spend a lot of time to get this thing done. And here is the final result of this clip versus what it was. The difference? So as you can see, this is called the primary and secondary color correction. The other one, you already saw how the motion tracking with the mask works. This is very useful because, for example, this should work better because her eyes are actually completely closed, isn't it? Let me create an in and out point for this clip so we can only see the, I can loop this thing only. So let's take a look. Yeah, I can really tell by looking at her eyes, but in this case, what I can do is I can make a secondary color correction. I will call this thing face. And I definitely make a mask for her face, and this should be very easily for Premiere to track because her face shape, it stays correct, and she should be able to track everything properly. Let's take a look. Position, and go for it. I'm crossing my finger. Let's see. Doing all right so far. Yep, that's good. That's actually pretty good. Every version I've seen, Adobe is improving the motion tracking in Premiere because that's a Adobe After Effects motion tracker. After all, I'd use the same plugin. But because Premiere plays the video, After Effects plays the video as a photographs. So After Effects does have a processing apply to it. Like it cleans them up, it blurs the edge, it enhances the color before it tracks it. Premiere doesn't do any of those things, so it's less accurate. But overall, looks actually pretty good. I'm going to go to Lumetri, and I can just make her face slightly brighter using curves. Just a bit. And also, if I need to match her face with this one, I go to the comparison view. Remember, comparison view has two little settings there. One is for the first one, and then this was the second one. If I need to see her face side by side very closely, I select this option. This option led me to double check and look at her face, and I need to make this one slightly more redder to line them up. There. I can also have them upside down, side to side, so that double check. And in this case, I think side by side looks pretty good. And Yep. See? That should be close enough for these two scenes. So that's the one thing I did. Now let's just say lips are a little bit tricky because she opens her lips a little bit. I'm not sure how much of a trick is, but you guys already get the point. What else you can do with this thing? This can be done quite a bit. And one last thing about the water. If you want to create before we move on to the last exercise, because I have only 45 minutes left, and the last one I want to show you some very neat tricks. If I want to fix the water, the problem with the water is if I try to fix it, it's going to damage the whole thing. So for the water, I will apply a Lumetri secondary color to it in here. And I will call this thing water. Couple of things I can do. I can track her completely, the whole body, and invert the mask. What I mean is, for example, that's the one option. I need to select her completely like this. Now, I'm not trying to select the water, because if I change the water color to blue, then anything is underwater would have probably affected by it. So I'm just going to make a simple mask around to show you the concept. Okay, so let's just say something. Again, the bottom is very tricky because the water moves around. I have no idea where the edge is. So let's just say this is a mask I made. If I go to, for example, my creative, and I choose something called blue ice, this can make a water look very blue. I'm gonna push it, or maybe put it to something called SL blue intense. The good news about the mask is I can invert the mask. See the difference? What I did with the water? Now I need to track her and taking care of that. Of course, it will be weird because it will see a halo edge and whatever. That's not a good idea. It needs a lot of work, but it's possible you can invert it. So there's a second option available. It's called a secondary correction, HSL. Secondary correction is I can actually tell and mask the water by the color. This is in Photoshop called, what's the name in Photoshop? Is called, is under select menu. Color range. That's right. In color range in Photoshop, you can select a particular color. You see the water green, there's no green on her face. So it's a nice one to select. When I choose that option, look what happened when I choose a mask. I guess I go with the black and white mask. Look. I can add to it. As I select the color, if I turn the mask off and I go back to that creative, I don't remember which one I used. I think I used a blue intense. Have you guys noticed her face is less affected by it? If I go back to my HSL secondary, I'm able to adjust the range of the colors being affected by it. If I do that, then anything is white, this effect will be applied to. Anything is black, it doesn't. See? Or sorry, anything is white will be applied to, black is transparent. So black is not being applied at all. So I can just go and choose her face, for example. Now, if you guys look at the mask, her face is completely black, and then the filter will not apply to her face at all. This is how you can apply or create a secondary. It's a very tricky one to apply, I'm going to select the blue. I'm going to select the reset. And also I'm going to go turn off the creative off. And let's take a look. And what I'm trying to show you is this area. Anything is white will be affected by it. Actually, this is better. The water is more green than a blue, isn't it? So let me see. I need to expand it. Yes. Her hair has to be excluded. See if I can play with the saturation. And what about the lightness? There we go. Remember, anything is black, she's been spared of this, whatever this color wheel is. If I turn my mask off, look what happens. Look at the difference. I made the water blue without literally masking it because I did it with the color. Now in here, all I gotta do is I can change the color to whatever I want. I can change the water to whatever I want. Now there's no way you can get a mask that accurate. And I have an option of a blur. See? Is it me or just the Photoshop? I mean, a lot of you guys worked with Photoshop before. Isn't it something you do in a Photoshop? You create a mask like that? But in Photoshop, it's under the select menu called a color range. And I can adjust the distance. Distance is more like a tolerance. Looks good to me. Again, this is done without using anything. Look. Done and done. Now look at the default before and after. You're going to say, what about those little green things that are left in there? Well, there are little green stuff left. I can go to a pin with a, or eyedropper with a plus, and I can add those green into the color range. Or I can expand the color range to include them. Remember, the best thing is watch the mask. If they are black, you don't see them. If it's white, then a blue applies. So I need to move this thing, make sure the background is really white. Sometimes, again, depends on you selecting a saturation, you're selecting other options there. I was focused on her hair so much that I miscalculated. There we go. There won't be any more green in there. And I feather it, and done and done. That's gone. But it's way, way better. Let's take a look at it. So these two clips back to back, very, very similar. The highlights, the shadow, the skin, everything looks the same. Again, the starting point for us was getting the black and the white levels, and then we adjust the RGB because we want to get the actual white balance. Once I get this thing, the rest of it is literally a Photoshop color correction, masking, color correction, just like Photoshop. I'm going to save my project and show you guys the last one. The last one is a very tricky because the last two clips, I'm just going to pick one of them. Mage 1 or Mage 2. I'm going to go with the first one. First one is actually a harder one to do. So let me make the screen there. This video is really weird because once you guys are looking at the resolution is 1408 by 1152 aspect ratio 2. This is one of those crazy here. Source, modify. You know what? I like to look at the property of the clip. Here it is. Look at it. This came from a red camera. Ratio is 2. And in red camera, this one was shot in 2K. So is at 2000, 2800 by something, technically. That's why it looks so wide. I'm gonna go to Lumetri scope, and obviously I'm gonna grab my adjustment layer, and I'll need to do a basic primary. My adjustment layer is too long, so I'm just gonna use a razor blade and just do a bit of a cutting here. So let's take a quick look at the Lumetri curves, and I start with the Luma. I'll go to the RGB, and it looks like there's a flat area there because that's supposed to be very powerful light passing through. So really couldn't do anything with this thing. So what I would do is I just grab the highlight, try to adjust the highlight the best I can. Remember, I gotta really far away from white anyway, and that's close enough. And then I need to adjust the shadows. And again, good enough. First of all, the video looked a bit cleaner. If I compare them side by side, you guys can tell that is a way more contrasty and cleaner so far. The next step I need to do is fix the RGB. Again, I'm going to use the did you see what happened? I applied the filter on the clip itself. Not a big deal, but despite this thing was on, my source track wasn't corrected. That's why when I wiggled the playhead, I noticed that where's my Lumetri filter? It's right here. The good news is you guys can cut the filter and put it somewhere else by cut and pasting it. So now the only problem is my adjustment layer is small. Look, because this video was way larger, so I better go make a new adjustment layer. Otherwise, the dimensions of it. Sure, I could go a scale adjustment layer. I just like to make a different size adjustment layers. And here it is. The good news is because I cut and pasted, I can just paste it here. It should work too. There we go. Good to go. As you can see, we all make a mistake, so I got to pay attention to what I'm doing as well. That looks good. I'm just gonna look at the RGB colors in here. Again, the green is the most trusted one. The red is slightly higher in the mid-tone, and the blue is slightly lower. So red mid gotta come down, and the blue gotta go up slightly. So I start with the red. Now, red is not exactly middle. It's a little bit lower than the middle. Something like this. That looks good. Then I go to the blue channel, and the blue is almost the same spot there. Need to go higher a little bit. That is done. Look at the clip now. How's it look like? Remember, a lot of video cameras, if you were there on a movie set and you use your, high-end video camera, when you're shooting it, it will get something look like this to begin with. Because video cameras are trying to create a video products that is not completely ready to go, but they try to get it as close as possible to what the user wants as an output. Film cameras or the Hollywood level professional cameras, that's not their intention. Because when you're making movies, take 6 to 8 months to make it. So they don't want the footages to look ready to go. They want the footages to be like this, so a colorist, somebody with the proper software and the tools, they can enhance and make it exactly what they want. They want all the color range and all the color definitions here to be saved, and they look as flat as possible because they want to preserve all the information, not to create something that is look good on the eyes and difficult to edit. So if you have a video camera, cinema camera, anything that you can shoot raw or with a no curve, just a flat, very flat look like this, then that's the best way for color correction. That's why personally I love the Blackmagic cameras. Blackmagic cameras, they shoot very flat like this. Add a camera on a raw, most likely you're not gonna like the quality. A lot of people don't because it's not a video camera. They call them pocket cinema cameras. They use it also in a couple of movies, by the way. You know, the Captain Marvel, they use the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema camera, the 4K version, or 6, I think it's a 4K. They use it in a train scene, and there's a couple of spots that, you know, you need a small camera. They use those cameras all the time. Not for a full movie, but definitely is good enough to use it for Hollywood movies. So this looks pretty good. Now, the question is, what next? Well, I can do a lot of color correction to this thing. I'm just going to show you a few of the steps. Again, the primary is done. I'm going to select, for example, something called the sidewalls. I'm going to do the sidewalls here. The walls, because this looks too flat. So I go and grab a Lumetri filter, drag it over, and I call this thing again primary. If I don't name them, then you have to go constantly see what is what. So this one I'm just going to call side walls. This should be easy. I need to literally make 2 masks. I'm going to go with the a mask like this. Again, I'm not really sure 100% how I'm going to deal with this thing, but I think the light coming through. So I'm going to go with something, follow the light direction in here. Something like that. I'll explain it to you guys later why I'm doing this, because I need to put a light in there. And by the way, that point has to be outside of the screen because I'm going to apply a massive amount of vignette. And I make a new mask for it. This side. Again, I'll try to follow the path of a light. Yeah, that looks good enough. So let's see. I'm going to put this thing to 100%. Is it 100% large enough? Oh, it's too large. I'm going to put it to 75%. Nope, 50. There. So let me fix this mask first of all. This has to be something like that. Definitely holding an Alt key led me to bend it like this. And put this thing right there. And do I need this thing to be stretched? Yeah, I think I can do this thing, right? Make it more like a shark teeth. That's not too bad. And I just stretch this thing. I'll try to stretch it as much as I can. Remember, at the end of the day, this is going to have a massive amount of, well, decent amount of feather. But you can argue that's the edge of a wall. You want it kind of sharp. That is also a valid point. But I got to be careful with the bottom. I don't want to go too much in the bottom because I don't want to interfere with this light. So yeah, you can see that they need a bit of a push and pull to get the curve the way you want it. So that's done. That's not too bad. The other mask, oops, wrong panel. The other mask, it's a bit more trickier because it's in the path of these 2 walls. Now there's supposed to be 2 spotlights. One on one of the windows that you guys can see the guard rays here, and the other one, but somehow the other one, the light angle wasn't good enough that you can't see it. So I need to add a synthetic one here. That's right. In Premiere, I'm gonna add a guard rays to the window, and you're going to see it in a few minutes. after I fix the mask. That looks good. So let me make the walls kind of darker by simply going to the Lumetri, and I will make the walls slightly darker right there. See? And I'm going to keep an eye on my, because I don't want to crush anything. Let's make it a little bit darker. That little thing helps quite a bit because look at the difference that the wall does. See how flat the wall in here is? But after I've done it, now the wall has some sort of depth to it. I can even push it darker to create more of an effect because I want this guy, the main character, to appear looks nice. And here it is. It's actually a very, very good little trick you guys seen here that you can adjust it. However, this edge needs to be adjusted. So I need to make the feather a bit higher. This potentially can harm the edge of this wall right there. In many ways, might actually make it look more natural, like this, right? Actually looks more natural like this way. There. And the same thing with this wall. I can make the edge looks more natural. This looks kind of fake. It's more natural. If you feel like the my mask should have been a little bit more inward or outward, don't worry. I got a mask expansion that I can adjust how much of a light passes through the wall right there. So I can control this thing, and I can control definitely the other one too. I will change that one because when I put a fake light in there, I don't want the light and the shadow to interfere. As you notice that this wasn't originally in the script, or the original lighting wasn't like that. I made it up. That's how powerful the color correction in Premiere is. I can adjust how much of a light goes on the cauldron on the side. Right there. That looks actually very decent to me. I better stop fiddling with it and keep playing with it. Otherwise, I'd never be able to finish this thing within that 20 minutes I've got. By the way, again, you can do the same thing with the background and the wall, everything else. Now, let me show you the little trick about the God ray. If I want to create a God ray, I need a light source. I need to put a light. Of course, in Premiere, we have a light. When I type light, it's under the generate called lighting. Actually, no, that's lightning. Lighting effect is under adjust. I always make that mistake for some reason. Lighting effect and lightning are not interchangeable, but for some reason I always use the wrong one. Lighting effect. This. When I apply lighting effects, you guys can see lighting effect is a filter. Technically, that's a Photoshop filter. You have 5 light sources, and light 1 is set to spotlight by default. So if I select the light 1 and the filter itself, you can see where the light is. I can move the light. Obviously, I want my light to be inside the left window. So what I would do is I will rotate the light. I'm going to turn the keyframes off. I'm not going to animate it. Thank God the wall doesn't move because this video is on a tripod. Otherwise, it would be a nightmare. So I'll use an angle to rotate out that much. I'm not really 100% sure the numbers. I'm just guessing most of the time, okay? Another thing I would like to do is I usually put my ambient intensity to 0 because I don't want the ambient light to kind of like bug me. This way, wow, well, actually looks very dungy, isn't it? I put this light inside too big. So I have an option that I can adjust the major and minor radius. The major radius is a length one, and a width one is called the minor radius. My minor radius is too much, so I'm going to reduce this thing to about 15 or 16. That looks a little bit better. And my major radius is a 30. You know what? I think looks all right at the moment. I'm just going to leave it as is. Then next thing I'm going to do, I'll try to boost the intensity of the light to about 50. Looks better this way at 50. I'll leave everything as is. Then of course I'm going to turn the filter off, because if the filter is on, I can't see anything. Now obviously the light is like a spotlight, but just imagine if the light coming through the window, like this window right here, don't you think the light will appear as a God ray, will be something look like this? So I need to create a God ray, and this light is more like a flashlight. I need to make it into a tapered and square looking light, because the wall and a window is supposed to cut the light. In this case, you know exactly what I'm going to do. Yes, mask. I select the pen tool on the lighting effect, and I create something look like this. I'm guessing, by the way, so don't think everything I'm doing in here is perfectly correct. I'm guessing. I have no idea what the result going to look like. I just need to make sure the mask is like this. What do you think can happen if I turn the filter on? This. See? If I uncheck it, can you guys see the effect? Now, there's a couple of things I need to do to make this thing to work. Obviously, a couple of things has to be adjusted. For example, after I apply the lighting effect changes the light situation. That's not good, because this has to be brighter because light hits it than the outside. Because I turn the ambience light off, the default is 20%. So if I put it back to 20%, it looks normal, isn't it? Looks like there's no changes to it. Look. Now it's looking rather decent. What I would do is I can increase the ambient light or ambience light a little bit, so it looks like the light actually making the surrounding brighter. In reality, it is, right? Like this, isn't it? Supposed to do that? Now, obviously, my mask stopped because I wasn't really sure what I'm doing here. I think I need to grab the thing and pull it a little bit more, because I want the light at least hit the ground, right? But how far? Far? You do it, right? How much feather for a mask? Be honest with you, don't know. I'm gonna try something here. 70? I'm cheating, by the way. I'm looking at the other one. How's that look like? Actually, not bad, isn't it? Not bad at all. He's getting there. Obviously, the spotlight will be nicer if I make it into a blue light. The white looks kind of, you know, strange. I'm gonna make it into a blue, something like a light blue. But that's too strong. Something lighter. The reason is because if you look at the other light, is a slightly tint of blue to it. The original clip. So here, that looks actually not bad. Not bad at all. And so one thing you guys know better that is very difficult to do in computer graphics, especially when you're making a mask, is the light supposed to have a sharp edge close to the window, and as it gets farther away, it's supposed to become more blurry. That's how the shadow casts usually. In movies, they do things like that. Now in Adobe After Effects, I can do that way, way easier than in Adobe Premiere. Premiere has a lot of limit to it. So it is a very valid point that the shadow or a god ray close to the edge should be sharper, and as it comes closer to the wall and they hit the ground, supposed to be more feathered. I 100% agree with you on that. But unfortunately, Premiere would not allow me to create a variable feather values there. In After Effects, I can do that. You can also use this very neat trick in here by creating an effect in Adobe After Effects. You can create a filter like a ramp, you know, the gradient, and you can put the white one side, black one side, and then use a multiply to knock the black out and leave the white alone. So you can create a feather edge for you in a variable rate. In the Adobe After Effects class that's coming up, I don't remember, is it a Friday or a Thursday? I have to look at my calendar. I will show you that trick, how you can create a variable gradient and variable feather from one edge to another edge. Then some of you will attend the other one. I will remind you, if you remember the window or the highlight, that was the same trick. Good news, by the way. If I want to apply this god ray, you guys can, by the way, reduce the opacity of this god ray. Remember, opacity of the mask controls the opacity of the filter, right? So if you feel like this is too strong, you can reduce this thing. Maybe you want it match it to the other one, like this. Maybe you want to have it strong like this. Completely up to you. I want to put another one, so I'm going to copy this mask or make a new mask. You know what? I'm not going to copy anything. I'm just going to make a new one because the same filter, everything should apply the same way. That it is including the mask itself. Look, I have a second light. I just need to push this thing a little bit higher. And put it there. Let's just say somewhere here. And obviously mask number 2 need to be feathered. And also, because the original one had a light in there, I might just reduce the mask opacity to about 10%. So I wanted to enhance the god rays. So look at the difference. As far as the god rays goes, there. Again, it was there once before. I just wanted to enhance it. Maybe just make it a little bit more though on a mask number 2. This, I think a 1 is too strong. Again, that's just my take on that. I think I should lower it down a bit. There. Okay, come on, down a little bit more. I don't have to worry about the feather anymore because it doesn't appear too bad here. At the end, I'm gonna create another Lumetri color on top. And for example, this one, I'll call this Lumetri look. This Lumetri look creates the final output. Again, don't rely on this thing because this is showing you the original footage. I'll go with something dungy like a SL Blue Steel. Nope. How about how about bleach it anyway? You can bleach it too, eh? I go with the bleach SL Bleach LDR. Ooh, that looks weird. What about the HDR? Yeah, a little bit better. So this is what the bleach does to it. It makes it a bit sharper. But I like to make it more, as I said, more like a dungeon effect by using, I think the blue intensity is good. This should make it look actually kind of decent. There. And I'm gonna reduce the amount of the intensity. Just put it to a bit lower, so there's a bit of a more blue to it. I can definitely apply, the last thing I'm gonna do, I'm gonna go to vignette, and I'm gonna apply a bit of a vignette to it. Vignette, the problem is this edge is a little too sharp, and the vignette make it even more the other way. There we go. This is a vignette effect. I need to adjust the midpoint of it. Sometimes I'll go turn off the other filters. So when I apply the vignette, at least I can see what the vignette does, where the vignette applies. See, that's the one. If I go too far with this amount, you guys can see what it does. Also, I can adjust the roundness of the vignette. And I'm happy with the softness. That looks good. Now I can go turn everything else on. If you have a computer that kind of struggles a bit, mine, as you can see, is really hot. I can guarantee that the CPU and graphic cards are running kind of hot at the moment. Oh yeah, 86 degrees of the CPU and a graphic card runs at 62 degrees. So the fans are running at 6,000 and at 2,400 respectively. So color correction need a lot of computer power. And this is not even a 4K. None of these footages are 4K. Just imagine you're dealing with a 4K footage. And this is a final result. What we have done. One before and then after. I think I turn off one of my filters there. Yeah, the light. There we go. So here's a before and after. And my computer should be able to play real time. You guys cannot see it online, but it does play it properly. There. With a lot of noise there. And again, if you want to, this tapestry, whatever on the sides, if you want to enhance those things, you need to mask that tapestry and then exclude it. For example, if I want that tapestry on the side or a flag on the side to stay untouched, I got to find out what's causing the problem. This is the filter that actually make it darker, right? So I go to that particular filter, they call it sidewall, and I make a mask to exclude it like this. I make a basic mask right here. And I should be able to invert that mask. Nope. Sorry, my fault. You know what? Why doesn't work? I was thinking like Adobe After Effects. Some of you work with After Effects. You know, in Adobe After Effects, you can select the mask and select the option subtract, right? Under the mask setting, just like an Adobe Illustrator Pathfinder. Well, as you can see, that backfired. If I need to do something like this, I need to modify the mask number 1 and go around it by making more like a loop. That becomes kind of tricky because I cannot make a second mask to subtract it. Unfortunately, the masks in Premiere, they work in a very basic mode. Let me apply a filter here. For example, in Lumetri, I'm just going to go and apply something, make it a bit brighter. If I make a mask in here, it applies to the mask, obviously. But if I apply another, make another mask, the mask by default, they add to each other, just like that. Like I did for this wall and that wall. But if I invert the, for example, the circle, I lost the other one. Look, the other one is there. So I can see through it, but it's not the way you think Adobe Photoshop will work or Illustrator works or Adobe After Effects. They invert one of them at a time. And when I invert the other one, I can just go over and subtract each other, but both of them has to be inverted. So in my case, it's too complex. I have to think about the method to select one of those tapestries on a wall, and I subtract it and then add it to be able to somehow get the result. Is not gonna be that easy. But there is a hope. There's a hope. Always is. And it's here. This layer. Let's just say I like to preserve that. I can do this. I can alt click and drag it up that layer. That means duplicate, right? And then I select that layer and I just simply mask it under the opacity. If I mask it, this creates something known as garbage mask or garbage matte. See? Obviously, I'm doing a very lousy job here because I got only 3 minutes left time. So I can feather it. And then I can obviously blend it with the background. Maybe something like a soft light. Oops. Lighten. Something eventually should blend. There we go. Color dodge? Yeah. Color dodge. Look at it. There. Actually, color dodge looks pretty good. Never done it before, by the way. It's the first time I'm doing that. There. Now, if you want the tapestry to stay on, color dodge works the best. Who knew? Anyway, I have no idea, by the way, the color dodge would be the thing. I know the trick, you have to put it on top layer, but choosing color dodge was just like one of those things that you, actually, that's not too bad too. The pen light, no, makes no difference. Nope, color dodge. Looks pretty decent. Just gotta make sure my mask has a decent amount of edge around it because I see a little bit of glowing effect around. I'm gonna make it more feathered. And look, I can brighten this area of a wall. By the way, my mask, I will do something else to it while we are on the subject. This is not a very good mask, so I'm gonna make the mask looks like a light is actually shining on it by making it to a triangle. Something look like this. I'll put another light source. Why not? Uh-oh, this is not a good idea. I'm gonna leave it around this area. What do you guys think about this now? How's that? Okay. I just gotta be careful with the candle light. I just don't want to go too far with this. Bring it up here. Done and done. This is another one. This is unorthodox, by the way. If I turn all the layers off, this is what you see, eh? And the background, you know, is transparent in Premiere because once I use that garbage matte, it's transparent. So this is just the Photoshop, isn't it? This layer sits on top of it. There. I didn't even bother to color correct it because thanks to the blending mode, you could just grab the primary correction from this one and simply copy paste it. You could do that if you wanted to. I just didn't bother because that's in the side and nobody really cares. It's just there. I just want to make sure the light and the flag and tapestry is there. Now, if you think it's a little bit too strong, you already know what the solution is. opacity, just knock the value down. There, 0, 100%. I just go to, let's say, 75%, 70%, it looks decent. Next time when you watch movies like a Lord of the Rings and stuff like that, look at the inside a castle or Harry Potter stuff, you will see there's a flags or a Hogwarts, I don't know, Ravendell, or what's the other place there they have? The Hufflepuff, if you're a fan of that school of witchery. I like, you know, what's the other one that the bad guys usually go into? The Slytherin or something. I like that kind of school. But anyway, if you're a Hogwarts fan and you're a Gryffindor fan, you look at the scenes. There are always a little bit of light. Sometimes they don't put a light in there because that light could also interfere with the lighting of the other wall. After all, lights are blending to each other, right? So they will correct it in post. That's what the colorist job is. Colorist is not just making primary correction, making sure your highlights and shadows are good. That's why it takes forever in the movies. Not just the simple fact of I can adjust the highlights and shadows. Nope, there's a lot more to it. Hope you guys enjoyed this session. The time is up, and this 3 hours went really, really quickly for me. Hopefully see you guys tomorrow, Thursday or Friday session classes. Until next time, you guys have a great day and take care. Bye-bye.